Hello everyone, and welcome back to the C Programming with Windows API series. Now in the previous tutorial we actually talked about linked lists and how to use and implement linked lists in our everyday program or application. In this tutorial we're going to be talking about the concept of command line arguments. This is in fact the last tutorial in the beginner series. Before we move on to the intermediate series, I would like to cover command line arguments as they're very important for us and we will be using them in later tutorials. So let's go ahead and open up our Visual Studio IDE. Here I have the template open up that we've been using for the previous tutorials. Right now I'm going to write a multi-line comment where I'm going to be talking about, or where I'm going to be writing some of the things we'll be talking about in this tutorial, as well as some definitions or parameters that will be covered in this tutorial. So let's go ahead and open up that comment. So this tutorial is about command line arguments. So we're going to be covering how to use command line arguments and what are command line arguments. And we're also going to be covering about the main function. So the main function being this function. And what it has to do with command line arguments. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm actually going to start talking about the main function. So the main function, what is it? Basically, it's the function where our application runs. We're aware that whatever code we put in this function here is whatever code will be outputted whenever we run our application, or whatever code will be compiled whenever we compile our application. Okay, so what is this function in general? Basically, the PE loader, the portable executable loader created by Windows, which is the loader that initializes whenever we execute an exe application of type exe, it basically looks for an entry point in every application. And an entry point is an address in memory where the PE loader looks for to execute a certain application. Now take note, the address of the entry point may vary at any given time. However, the static or default entry point for a Win32 application is 0x004 0000. This right here, no, just one more. So this right here is the default or static entry point for 32 bits. Note, 32 bits executable. Okay, but the entry points of any given executable may in fact vary, and it may vary on however the coder or the programmer changes that entry point. Now, the entry point can be changed, and it can be changed in the linker settings. However, we're not going to be covering that just yet. We'll actually be talking about that in the intermediate level of these tutorials, or of this series. But for now, we know that the entry point of any given console application is main, and whatever address main resides at. And before the main function is actually called, there's actually a function that's called that we don't see, called it's called Main Crt Startup. Okay, so for any Win32 application, this is the initial function that's called before main is actually initialized. And basically what this function does is it initializes something called a CRT, or C runtime library, which we will talk about in the intermediate level of the series. But however, for now, note this is the function that's actually called prior to main. And basically this function, what it does is it initializes everything that goes on before main. So like whatever parameters are going to be passed to main are going to be determined by this function, which we don't actually see. However, we can actually use or define this function directly in the linker, but again, I'll be talking about that later on in the series. But anyways, let's move on. Okay. So in this tutorial, we're going to be talking about command line arguments. So command line arguments are arguments that are passed to the entry point function, in our case main, which can be used to manipulate the course of our program if we do choose to use them, in fact. So let me go ahead and open up a command line or a command prompt, okay? And I can do that by going to Tools, Visual Studio Command Prompt, and then I'm going to right-click 15, our project 15, open folder, go to the main root directory of this folder, copy and paste the directory path, and cd path. Oops, copy paste. Okay. So in fact, this application right here. Okay, let me compile it. So rebuild. Okay, close this now. Dir release. Okay, dir. So this application that we have here, 15.exe, when we run this application, as you see, nothing happens. However, this application can take something called command line arguments. And let me actually go on and make this a little bigger here. Command line arguments are arguments, or they're parameters passed not to a function, but to the actual application itself. So you can kind of think of them as parameters passed to a function, except in this case the function is the program name, and the parameters are anything that's passed after the program name. And you know how, for example, between the data type of the function and the function name itself, we have to keep a space, because if we don't keep a space, then the interpreter, or rather the syntax parser, doesn't know that this is doesn't know what this is because it's not defined anywhere, and there's no data type for whatever this name is. So we have to put a space to separate the two, the data type and the function itself. Just like with that, we would put a space to separate the program name, which we're executing, 15.exe in our case, and then a space separating each and every parameter after the program name. So let's say we want to pass like 15.exe, and then we want to pass like Bob, Kate, and like Andy to the parameters, or rather to the arguments to this program. So these are actually 3 arguments that we're passing. And 15.exe note is actually the first initial argument of this application. What do I mean by this? Let me go back here and go into the main function parameters. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna define 2 variables. Okay, the first variable that I'm gonna define is called int num args. Okay, and the second parameter that I'm gonna define is char pointer args. Okay, let me zoom out here a little bit. Okay, so basically, the first parameter that's passed to the main, which main, remember, is called by that Main Crt Startup function in the Win32 application. The first parameter that's passed to main is numargs. And numargs, by default, the first parameter passed to main, is the number of arguments passed to main whenever it's called inside the command line. So in this case, the number of arguments will be, well, as you see, 3. And char pointer args, open-ended array, so like undefined size of an array. Also, we can also define this as a pointer to pointer. So basically, what this means is args, the second parameter to main, is it will store any number of strings passed to main separated by passed to main separated by a space. So any number of strings being the argument itself. So we can also pass like numbers, right? And words, or even characters. And these are just arguments passed to the function, to the actual application. So let me go ahead here and just printf args, or rather num args. So I'm going to just do something like this, printf num args, so you guys can see what numargs actually is and what I'm actually talking about when I say this is the amount of arguments passed to this application. So I'm going to build the application, okay, and then I'm going to call it. Let's just say we pass 1, 2, 3, okay. So the number of arguments is 4. So as you can see, the actual application name itself, as I said before, is the first argument. This is the second argument, third, and fourth. So the number of arguments passed to this application is 4. The actual application name is the first argument. So if we were to reference args0 at index 0, we would get the application name as the output, as you see here. So I'm going to change this to S. Okay. And then just do args0. Okay. And then rebuild the application. Okay. I forgot to close the application, so it gave me the compile time error. Rebuild it after I close it. Okay. And then 15.exe, as you can see, it prints 15.exe in the command line. args0 being the first index, being the first argument passed to the command line. In this case, it's 15.exe, the actual program name. Okay, so very simple. If we pass, let's say, another argument, let's say the argument following the actual program name itself, and we want to output args1, okay, we compile the application again. We get the same error because I forgot to close it again. Press enter in the command prompt. Okay, we type 15.exe and type hello world. We get we get hello world as the output in the command line. Okay, cool. So what happens if we, let's say, do args2? Okay, did I close it? No, I didn't. Okay, I'm just gonna actually remove this tool's weight because, or rather, let's just uncomment it just to be technical. I'm gonna remove it because we're just running this from the command line, so we're gonna be, regardless, we're gonna be able to see the output because we're not running it from the debugger, which the debugger in this case will close right after the program finishes executing. But since we're running in the command line and we open the command line ourselves, it won't close. So anyways, clear the screen, 15.exe. So let's say, right, I have args2, but let's say I only put one argument, okay? So I put hello, okay? And then I try to output args2. As you can see, the output is null, and that being because there's actually no third argument passed to this command line. The 0th argument, or the 0 index, is 15.exe, and the first is hello. But the second one, which we're trying to output here, in our printf statement, is nothing. So therefore it outputs null. So if you try to output more arguments than there actually exist, then every argument after that will be displayed as null. Okay, and we can know how many arguments will actually exist by using numargs, or the first parameter to main, as our index or delimiter. So let me just go ahead and type for int, let's say n, okay, n is equal to 0, n is less than numargs, plus n, printf s, okay, new line, args n. So we're using numargs as our delimiter, so it can't go more than less. So if it's equal to or greater than numargs, it'll stop the for loop, and it'll stop outputting the number of arguments, or however many arguments we actually output into the command line, or put into the command line. So let's run 15.exe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and as you can see in the output we get 15.exe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so now you understand how to use command line arguments in your application, and how to delimit or get the total number of arguments to pass to your application. That being the first parameter, and the actual arguments themselves, and the index being the second parameter. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to write a simple application to add two numbers together. Okay? So For this application, we're going to need, actually, I think it's part of the windows.h library. So, okay. Or sorry, the windows.h header file. My mistake. So we're going to basically write an application which is going to add all the numbers inputted inside our through the command line. It's going to add them all together and just going to output the sum of all numbers. So basically, we know that the arguments themselves are outputted as a string, but we need to convert the number to a number, okay? So, okay, so we're going to just write a for loop, okay? We're going to have one value being an integer value, and this integer variable, is going to be called sum. We're going to set sum equal to 0. We're going to do for int n equals to 0. N is less than num args, okay? Well, we're actually going to start from n being 1 because we don't want to, because we're basically what we're going to do is we're going to convert all of the numbers, all of the arguments passed to the application. We're going to convert them to integers, and then we're going to add them into sum, and then output the total sum using the command line arguments as the input. But we don't want to, because remember how I said the 0th index or the 0 index of args is the actual application name itself, as you see here, 15.exe. 15.exe can't be converted to a number. Only the numbers that we input will be converted to numbers. So that's why I'm starting from n equal to 1. Because at n equals to 1, it means every index after the first or the 0th index being the application name itself. So every index after the actual application. Okay, so plus n, I'm just going to increment n by 1 every time. And then I'm simply going to do sum plus equals, okay, args n. Now take note, I can't do this, right? Because args is a string, right? A char pointer to pointer, or rather a char pointer because I already referenced which index I want it at. But sum is an integer, and I can't just add it directly to an integer. So what I want to do is I'm going to use a function called string. Okay, let me just uncomment this, or rather comment that out. I'm going to use a function called string to int. And yeah, it's actually inside a header file called shell windows api.h. So this shell windows api.h header file actually contains a function called str to int. And str to int will convert any string that we pass to it to a integer, and then that way the output of whatever the string is will be an integer. We'll be able to add integer whatever to sum, and then we'll be able to output or just printf at the end, printf total d is sum after we add all of the numbers together. Now take note, when I type string to int, as we see when we hover over it, it says define string to int, so it's a definition, a preprocessor definition, string to int w. And the string to int w stands for, the w stands for Unicode. And there's also a, which stands for ANSI. And I talked about this before, or multibyte in the other words. I talked about this before. The only reason it's saying string to int w, the only reason it's assuming that it's a Unicode function when I type the preprocessor definition is because in the program or the project properties, and I'm actually going to talk about this more in the intermediate level of the series. In the project properties, we can see here that the character set for this application, the character set being the actual kind of code page that I'll talk about this more in the intermediate series, but basically there's two kinds of character sets. There's Unicode character sets and there's multi-byte character sets. Basically, Unicode character set is used for characters. It's used to store characters such as Arabic characters, like Chinese characters that aren't part of the actual US or English code page. So if it's not part of the English code page, like Russian characters also, then it'll be stored as a Unicode character. But also the Unicode can also store it can also store English characters as well. But if it's only limited to English characters, which in our case, in my case it is, then we can go here to the character set property and click on this little drop down and select use multi-byte character set. Now when we click use multi-byte character set, as we can see here, there's still a, it's here, like if it's still string to int W as you see. But once we hit apply and hit OK, we can see now it switches to, okay, hold on. It switches to string to int A, and it assumes that this preprocessor definition is now the ANSI version, which can now accept characters, not Unicode characters. Okay? Again, I'll talk about that more in the intermediate series, but for now, let's move on and use string to int A to convert args n to an integer. Okay. So now that we converted it to an integer, we can add sum plus equals string to int args n, and then output the total. So I'm just going to make sure I close the application. Yes, I did. Okay. So I'm going to rebuild, and I get a string to int unresolved external import. Right. So basically, I get this linker error right here because it can't find the string to int a function inside of the import table. This tells us the imp stands for import, and it can't find this function inside the import table because we never actually included the library which this function is coming from. We only included the header file which defines the prototype for this function. However, we never actually included the library itself. So I'm actually going to talk more about the linker, as I said again, in the intermediate level of the series. That's why I really want to move on to it in the next video. But for now, I'm going to include the library simply by typing, ignore this for now, I'm only typing this so that I can use this string to int function, okay, or the string to int API, but I'll talk more about this in the intermediate series. Basically all I'm doing is I'm going to include the library for this function. So it's pragma comment lib shell winapi.lib. Okay, so now I included the library inside the linker for this function. So now when I run it, it finds the prototype in shell winapi.h, and now it's able to look for the actual function itself inside the import table, which is now included from statically linked from the shell winapi library that we just included from the linker. So I'm going to rebuild the application now, and as you can see now there's no compile errors. And now I'm going to run the application. 15.exe 1 2 3. Okay, so as you can see, I ran the application. I passed 1 2 3 as the command line arguments, and the total, which is the sum, is 6 because 1 plus 2 is 3 and 3 plus 3 is 6. So the total is now 6. So now, as you see, we just learned how we can manipulate command line arguments and how to use them in our application. So if you want, guys, you can play around with this more on your own. But that actually wraps up everything for this tutorial. So if you learned something new, or if you just enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a thumbs up. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. Any suggestions, same thing, leave a comment down below. Thank you guys for watching. Congratulations on completing the beginner level of this C programming with Windows API series. Now we're going to start moving on to the intermediate level of the series. Again, thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned for the next video. Bye.